Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I am joined by the author of an absolutely riveting fantasy romance series that was so much fun to read. I marathoned them over, I think like maybe an 11 to 12 day period. It was really a productive reading period for me. So thank you very much for that. Welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book series, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm L.R.W. Lee, at least that's my pen name. You can call me Linda for the purposes of today. But I'm a USA Today bestselling author of 20 genre-bending novels, including the acclaimed Morningstar Academy series. My newest book in the series, Marked, is about a group of morally conflicted fallen angels trying to save the fate of humanity. And it just released in May.
Congratulations on your release and on this series. Could we start off by talking a little bit about your journey toward this series? I'm really curious about what the inception point is. Was it a character or a scene or a vibe? Like, what was your entry point?
Yeah, that's a great question. So all of my series, so this is my fourth series, but all of my series, I write stories that address difficult topics relevant to readers in real life. And I love using fantasy as a genre because it allows readers a sense of escape and entertainment while addressing the difficult topic. In the case of Morningstar Academy, what I would say is when you look at the news, I think in general, you come away with anxiety. It feels like the world maybe that you knew 20 years ago is just, it's like it's upside down. Things don't make sense anymore. It's like what used to be and what you relied on, it's like it's totally upside down. And so I wrote the series to allow people to step back, get some perspective on what's going on, and primarily to give hope when things don't make sense.
Nice. Yeah, it's an excellent time for a series aiming to do that because you're right. I think the news is chaotic every single day and it's stressful for adults. And I imagine it is just as stressful for young adult or for new readers or, even adults who enjoy these books, like it's just a hard time to exist.
Well, and what I would also add is while the series is specifically targeting young adult readers, but with the heavier topic in terms of the upside downness, as well as what I would say intricate, vivid world building, it also appeals strongly to adult fantasy readers.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that physically I am an adult, even if I don't feel like one every day, and I enjoy it.
You're not alone.
Yeah. So this is the third book in the Morningstar Academy series of a planned 4. And I'm really curious, when you began it, did you have that structure laid out in your mind right away, or did it take form as you developed the story?
I always begin a series with, typically I write 4 books in every series. To me, it just makes sense in my brain. The first book is the beginning, the 2 middle are the middle, and the last one is the end. I mean, in terms of beginning, middle, end, right? So whenever I think about a series, I always, even as I'm beginning, think about that in terms of what point in the overriding story needs to be reached by the end of each of those books. And that's pretty much how I structure a story. So for instance, if it's the beginning, I'm like, okay, well, the first 25% of this overall arc gets me to point X, right? So then, and so on. So that's how I approach a series because for me, it's never going to be about one book. They're never standalone. It's always about the whole story arc.
Cool. That's very interesting. And I wonder if that is actually what lets you do what I see happening here is that this is at once a very personal and interior story, but also it takes place on like a cosmic scale, right? Because we're talking about fallen angels and the Almighty and the devil. And like we're talking
Yes.
about things that truly happen on the largest scale that I think that humans can't imagine in some ways. How do you balance like that very personal storytelling with like a sort of mythic, epic structure?
Well, I think so. Every story fundamentally comes down to the individual characters, right? So it has to be that way, just because it's like you can't. It's always the character experiencing what's happening in the world. So whether it's, as you say, on this huge scale, which you're right, but even we as individuals, we can only experience the world individually,
Mm.
right? And so I look at, okay, whenever I'm writing a scene, it's always I get into the mind of the character and say, okay, how would this character perceive this, or how would they react to this, or basically getting into their head, almost like becoming them in terms of then I can write the scene from that perspective, because in this series there are primarily two points of view, and so I'm constantly getting into the heads of both Gladriel, who falls, as well as her former squadron mate who has a crush on her. Well, I guess you could say it's a mutual love interest, Kessian. And so through the Morningstar Academy series, we see how their relationship grows, evolves, and we move forward from that. So in terms of experiencing the cosmic level of things, yeah, I think you can only do it from an individual perspective.
Hmm. That makes a ton of sense. And I think that you do need that for it to maintain that cosmic scale in an almost paradoxical way, because it has to seem bigger than the character can perceive.
Yes.
Absolutely does.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, like the characters have to a great extent, they have to feel overwhelmed by it.
Yes.
It's like they can't come up to a point where like, oh, I got this. Okay. Well, then the story's over, right? I'm sorry. There's no more conflict.
Yep. So I'd love if we could talk a little bit more about the characters. Gladriel, I love her. She is so headstrong, but also really passionate and really cares about the people in her life. And I'd love if we could talk a little bit, not just about crafting her as an individual, but also her relationship dynamics. In particular, I'm super interested if do you think there's a difference between writing friendship chemistry and romantic chemistry, and how does that differ for you?
So to begin, I'll take your first part of the question first. So in terms of her being headstrong, yes, she absolutely is. And that's the fun of it, because it's like when a character or even a person in real life is headstrong, fundamentally as a reader that, okay, this is going to get them into problems, right? And then if we look at Kessian, on the other hand, he is the super protective guy, right? I mean, he's a celestial warrior, and he knows his role there. He's to protect humans, basically any of the quote assets of the Almighty. That's what they're sworn to protect. But in the process, he falls in love with Gladriel, which means that then he's got certain feelings of protection that go beyond a normal warrior toward her.
Mm.
So it's like trying to protect this headstrong character that is, it's like she's got a heart of gold, but it's like, and he gets that. It's one of the things he loves about it. But on the other hand, it's like, doggone it, would you just allow me to protect you? Stop putting yourself out there, right? And so you have all this conflict, and it's wonderful conflict.
Mm.
And I think the readers just get wrapped into that, because it's like you can so, identify. It's like, oh, this person's amazing, but they're so frustrating on the other end.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
in terms of then and I've kind of got into that, it's like the whole relationship dynamic. And in Gladriel's case, her BFF, Astrid, plays a huge role in this series, because it really is her guilt that causes her to act to begin with, which is what causes her to fall. And
Mm.
you'll see more of how this resolves in the last book, which is one I'm currently writing, right? But yeah, so the Morningstar Academy series, it will definitely wrap with a happily ever after, and I think everybody's going to be excited about it. but there is plenty of angst and, oh, I can't believe this is happening. And, just nail biting. And I mean, action, adventure, it's all there.
Right. Yeah, it's really a beautiful, I think it's going to touch back on what I said before, but it is this mix of really nuanced character dynamics with also like intense sort of fantasy plotting, and they both just work so well and support each other. In terms of let's say building an apocalypse or world building an apocalypse, what goes into that for you? Do you have like celestial hierarchies that inspired you, or other depictions of sort of the heavenly realm? Like, what is in your sort of your writerly DNA, as it were, in crafting this?
Yeah, so unlike with my previous couple of series that are about Greek gods and retelling those stories, where I invented the entire universe, right? This one, the Morningstar Academy universe, was actually a whole lot easier because I didn't invent much of it. Most of it, and I don't want this to be a turnoff to listeners, but most of it I just pulled out of the Bible in the book of Revelation, or there's several Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, several books in the Bible that this does not. So you tell me, was this an exceptionally religious book?
I feel like it
Well,
plays with, yeah, like if it speaks on topics that are part of people's faiths and that are part of worldviews and universe views, I would say, but it's not, it still reads like a, I don't even know how to say it, like not a secular story, but it's about things that matter to human beings, not just things that matter to gods, you know? So,
yes, exactly. And so you are never going to see in this series where you have a whole bunch of people praying, or, it's like there's none of the normal quote turnoffs. I purely, when we talk about the world building, I looked through the book of Revelation, and honestly, this is the timeline. These are the events that are depicted there. Now, granted, there's a lot of question in terms of what does each of these events really look like? And so it was my opportunity to give my own spin on it. The interesting thing about it is, so the book of Revelation was written by a guy named John, and he was supposedly seeing this vision of things, which, bear in mind, he's living way back when, no clue about modern technology. So what he may speak to, he's trying to grapple with what he's seeing based upon what he has available to him that day. So, I mean, I've heard all sorts of interpretations in terms of what people think. Oh, well, this must be this. It's like, anyway, so the bottom line is there's no causation ever attributed to any of the events. And so it was up to me to decide, okay, what in the world causes all of these events to unfold? And so that is my, if you want to say fanciful, I don't want to say there's just no cause ever given, right? And so it's my interpretation of what might have, who knows what, caused all this. So
I think it's really smart to use the Book of Revelation as a source of imagery and things that you can interpret and stuff like that, because the imagery is so vivid while also being, as you say, so out there, because
yeah.
I think your point is correct that like, yeah, like if we have, like, how would a person from the first century or so interpret a plane, right? Like it would probably
Yeah.
like in the in the language that they have. So I
Yeah.
really like that. And I love that, yeah, you get like access to all this really vivid imagery, but it gives you so much space to play with how you interpret it and then how you like manifest that.
Yeah. It was fun. I mean, it is fun. I'm not done, right? Let me tell you, the fourth book, wrapping this whole thing up, getting all of the story arcs that I began, and I always have to wrap them all up in the last book, but there honestly is still so much happening in the Morningstar Academy series that it's a real challenge. It's like, can I make this all fit in one book? Because how it wraps up, truly, like I said, I promised you a happily ever after. So I promise, but it's a challenge to get it all wrapped up.
Yeah, absolutely. If we could turn to Gladriel for a second, I think it's really interesting to watch her progress over 3 books as well. And I'm wondering if, like, when you are structuring a 4-book series in terms of like how a character is going to develop, do they have an arc for the entire thing, or do they also have mini arcs for one book? Like, do you think of it each book cohesively as a unit, or are you always focused on the bigger picture? If that, I hope that made sense in some way, but
It does make sense. So I would say 2 different things. One is, before I ever start writing a book, I do a very detailed outline. Every chapter has to have a purpose, moving the story toward wherever that conclusion needs to be. So that's one. In that process, some might say, well, okay, so you're a plotter, not a pantser. True. But I still do have room for the characters to evolve as they need to, right? So for instance, if I've put the whole outline together, I'm busy writing throughout the series, and if I get to a point where I'm like, you know what, what I thought was going to happen at this point, this just doesn't make any sense based upon where the character is at. And so I allow the characters freedom to tell me where they really want to go. And it's funny because not in this series, but in another series, I swear I let that happen and something manifested that I was just totally not expecting. I'm like, whoa. And then I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me that a book ago, right? Anyway, it is kind of that way. It makes you sound strange to say that as if these characters are real, but to a great extent, they are real in my head, and they are active and they are championing their own cause. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think that is so fascinating. I've talked to lots of people who've written series, and it does seem like there's a point at which, you stop telling the character who they are and they start telling you who they are.
Truly. Well, and it's funny that you say that, because typically the first book in a series, I really look at it as I'm getting to know the characters, right? As the author, because like I haven't had interaction with them before. So I'm, trying to discover where they're really coming from. And so typically the first book is, it's me kind of exploring who the characters are. And so some of it, it's like the first book may be a little, I don't know, it's like, to some extent, you could tell the characters are expressing themselves the first time. But then as you get very familiar with the characters, it's like, oh, well, then this character would do this, and whatever, especially the supporting characters. I mean, you've got the Bethors, you got the Nisroks, you got, all these great supporting characters that in the first book, I'm like, well, okay, they need to have a different role than the main protagonist. But it's like, what is that role really, kind of a thing. So feeling that all out. So back to your other question in terms of, do I plot like a character arc out? No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't. I let them tell me where they want to go.
I like that reasoning too, because I feel like if it's surprising to you, it must be surprising to the reader then. So
Yeah, totally. Totally.
Very cool. So I would love if we could talk a little bit about what follows for these characters. I know that, we're wrapping it up in the next volume. We have left them sort of at like an extremely, extremely interesting moment, let's say, without
Yes.
spoiling anything. And without giving too much away, like, what do you think readers can expect from the next volume in terms of vibes or who we'll see, stuff like that?
So are you speaking of the last book in the series?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So a lot of it, like I said, it's wrapping up all of the story arcs that I've started. And there are a ton, right? There are always a ton. It's like going back through the whole first 3 books, because believe it or not, it's not easy to remember what I wrote in book 1 at this point, right? So, but anyway, so no, it is especially I would say the main conflict for Gladriel wraps up in I'm going to say, to some extent, it's not unexpected, but it is unexpected in terms of exactly how it resolves itself. So, and well, I shouldn't say anymore. I shouldn't, I'm like, I could say more, but then I'm going to have spoilers in here. So,
Yeah.
so overall, I think everybody's going to be happy. Readers are going to be happy with how each of the main actors resolve in terms of what they end up doing. So.
Very cool. I'm so excited to see how things go. It was, I really like reading all the books in such a short period of time. Like really, I developed like really intense parasocial relationships with a lot of characters very quickly. So it's like we went through boot camp together, so.
Yes. No, that's awesome. I'm glad you could read them all back to back, because so much of the time people lose the continuity if you read them like a month or two apart, which is why I put in the front of each of the following ones, book 2, book 3, and book 4 kind of gives a very short synopsis of what happened in the previous book, so that when you hit it cold, you're like, oh, right, that was what was going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's very helpful, because I usually find that I do remember it, but it's just like it's gone into cold storage, So a few words
Yes.
like we'll bring it back to the surface. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for sharing these books with me and with our listeners. I am so excited to have them read it. And no pressure yet, but if you want to come back and talk about Destroyed when that one's out, we'd be happy to have you back.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if I may, in terms of where to get them,
Mhm.
yeah, so people can get them on my website at lrwlee.com, or you can get them on Amazon, although I will tell you that they're less expensive on my website. So, and even like the ebooks are really easy to download.
I think you should absolutely go out and get all of them. Like it is a really, really good time. Yeah, and it's a great time for it. Like it feels, at once like escapist, but also very relevant, which is like a really nice balance to be able to achieve.
Thank you. That's great.
Okay, listeners, now it's your turn. Please go check out Marked, and the books that precede it. It is so much fun. You're going to have a really great time. You've just learned where you can get them, so get yourself out there and start reading. Okay, thank you for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.